Hi guys. Today I want to talk about the subject of a sentence. It can be a little bit confusing because you get a lot of different sort of convoluted definitions when you start looking into it. Here's one. This is a dictionary definition. A word or word group, usually a pronoun or a noun, denoting that on which something is predicated. Okay, it's an accurate definition. It just might not be all that helpful. A better way to do is to look at what a subject actually does in a sentence, because it only has one of two possible jobs. The subject of a simple sentence will be either doing the action or it will be being described. That's it. So with a couple of questions based on those two things, we should be able to arrive at the subject. Here's one question. Is a sentence about action or description? That's the best place to start. If you can do that, you're in the right direction. Now you're going to run into sentences, and I'll show you at least one today, that does both. So it gets a little bit tricky. But in most cases, if you're dealing with a simple sentence, it's either action or description. That's really all English language sentences do. The other question we'll ask is who or what is doing the action or being described? The subject does the verb, and the verb is where we figure out if it's action or description, so it makes sense that this question will lead us to the subject. Let's take some examples. Here's one. There's a bridge over the river. Is that action or description? Well, if you just sort of close your eyes and imagine a picture as somebody reads this sentence, a bridge over the river, there's not any action going on. This is description, right? It's describing the bridge over the river. Pretty simple. So the bridge is being described. The bridge is the subject of the sentence. How about this one? Into the river jumped a frog. Obviously, there's action going on here. The action is jumping, but what's doing the action? Frog. Notice where it shows up in the sentence. It's at the very end. If you've done anything with subject and verb, probably the examples you ran into, a lot of them had the subject at the front of the sentence. Doesn't matter where it is in English. Most of the time, yeah, they're at the front, the verb somewhere in the middle, and the rest of the sentence goes on after that. But it doesn't have to be. If you ask these questions, you end up finding the subject not based on where it is in the sentence, but on the job that it's doing, the role it has in the sentence. The frog and the fish are fighting over a dragonfly. Again, that should kind of obviously be action, right? The fighting is the action. What's doing the fighting? Well, we've got two in this case, the frog and the fish, and that's fine. You can have two subjects doing the same verb. It's still considered one subject, but it's called a compound subject. It's a subject made of two parts. The dragonfly's wings are translucent. Okay, here we have just description. What's being described? The dragonfly's wings. Pretty simple. All right, I'm going to give you one that's not so simple. Here's that book you were asking about. Now you might have action popping into your head. Asking, right? If somebody is asking a question, that's a kind of action. Then you've got here is that book, which sounds a little bit like there is a bridge, right? That's description. Well, both of those perceptions are right. There's description going on and there's action. This is not a simple sentence. This one has two clauses in it. And a clause is just a group of words that has a subject and verb. So we could locate one subject and verb pair kind of on the left side of the sentence and one subject verb pair on the right. Right? The first one is description. Here is that book. So book is being described. That's one subject. The second is action. You were asking. So you is the subject for the second clause. So you get into more complex sentences, you're going to run into more than one subject and verb pair. You're dealing with multiple clauses. But for the sake of what we're going to do, at least in the short run here, we're going to deal primarily with simple sentences. So if you ask more, because another issue that we tend to run into with finding subjects are phrases that sound like, well, it could be the subject of the sentence. Look at this one. Tons of paper littered the trees. Okay, so if we ask our questions, there seems to be action. What's doing the action? The action is littering, right? What's doing the action? Well, it sounds like paper is littering the trees, and that's more or less true, but the sentence itself is being more specific than that. We want to try to stay as close to the words, the actual syntax here, as we can. Tons of paper littered the trees. The sentence is saying that tons littered the trees. What kind of tons were they? They were tons of paper. That of paper is called a prepositional phrase, and prepositional phrases just modify something else. They help to describe something else. In this case, the word tons. The sport of fishing is very popular in Australia. Here we have description. Well, what's being described? Sounds like surfing is, right? Surfing is being described as being popular. But again, just like in number 6, the sentence is being more specific than just surfing. It's the sport of surfing. A sport is being described as popular in this sentence. Of surfing is just describing what kind of sport it is. So there's our subject. There is a fly in my soup. Description, just like there is a bridge over the river. Nothing really tricky about this one, right? The fly is the subject. There at the beginning of the sentence or here at the beginning of the sentence, those are never subjects. How about this one? Number 9. This one always trips up my kids in school. One of the books on that shelf won a Pulitzer Prize. Okay. Sounds maybe a little bit like that one that I tried to trick you before. But it's not. There's just one verb here. And it's an action verb. The verb is won. Something won a Pulitzer Prize. A book won a Pulitzer Prize, right? But there is no word book in this sentence. There's books. But clearly the sentence is being more specific than that, right? It's one of the books on the shelf won a Pulitzer Prize. So one is the subject. Of the books is a prepositional phrase, just like of surfing and of paper. It's just describing, giving us more information about the subject itself. Okay, number 10. I threw in another kind of trick sentence here. On a hot summer day in 1964, the Beatles were welcomed to America by thousands of cheering fans. Okay, it sounds an awful lot like action, right? We have somebody welcoming somebody else into the country. Who's doing the welcoming? Thousands of cheering fans, right? Okay, but that's not the subject of this sentence. I mean, if you read the sentence and you just get a sense of who the sentence is about, it's kind of obvious it's about the Beatles, right? The Beatles is the subject, but this one doesn't seem to be fitting our question-answer protocol. What's going on here is a passive voice sentence. The Beatles is the subject. The Beatles are being described as were welcomed. And then we have somebody else, the cheering fans, or the thousands of cheering fans, doing the welcoming. A passive voice sentence is where the subject is not doing the action but receiving the action. We use these all the time. But if you're asking the question, who's doing the action, and you seem to come up with a wrong answer, like in this case, where it's sort of obvious that the Beatles are the subject, you may have a passive voice sentence. Now, our little method of doing this will work about 90% of the time. The 10% that it doesn't work is most likely going to be a passive voice sentence. We'll talk a little bit about those, the difference between passive and what's called active voice, and when you use one or the other later on. Okay, quick recap on today. We find the subject of a sentence by asking a simple two-part question. Who or what is doing the action or being described? Right? That will help us locate the subject. Don't worry about where it is in the sentence. It can be anywhere. If you're answering these questions, it'll be the right answer about 90% of the time. Okay, thanks guys. We'll see you in class.